My name is Jack Jezreel. I serve on the staff of Just Faith Ministries, and I'm delighted you could join us tonight. And as we always do, let's begin in prayer. This prayer is entitled Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor. So let us pray. Lord, when we listen with your ears, we hear the bush grown more silent, the bird song less vibrant, the stream's sluggish ripple. Have mercy and open our ears. Lord, when we look with your eyes, we see the soil depleted, the sky smudged, the oceans rubbished, and the great current slowed. Have mercy and help us to see. Lord, when we look with your eyes, we see the workers who struggle to get by, the women subjected to violence, the people who are excluded. Have mercy and help us to see. Lord, when we listen with your ears, we hear the sound of hungry children, the distress of the mentally ill, the silent pain of homeless women and men. Have mercy and open our ears. Send your Spirit upon us, Lord, to renew our sight, to restore our hearing, and to reclaim your reign of justice for all people and peace for creation. Amen. Again, welcome everybody. I'm joined this evening by the nicest human being on planet Earth, my colleague Leila Oakley, who will fill you in on a few details before I introduce tonight's speakers.
Well, thank you, Jack, for that exaggerated introduction. It's good to be here with you all tonight, and good to see many of your faces. I wanted to let you all know something that you may have already noticed, which is that you are unable to unmute. And we have that by design so that our presentation can be done this evening without interruption. We will have time for a Q&A later this evening. And so I invite you to send your questions through the chat to Jack, who will be moderating the Q&A. You can find your chat button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, or tap your screen if you're on your phone to locate that. Again, you can send those to Jack at any point for the Q&A. We'll also be moving into breakout rooms after the presentation, and to join a breakout room for a small group discussion, all you'll need to do is click join breakout room when it pops up on your screen. If you have any technical questions, feel free to message me in the chat. And finally, I wanted to let you know that tonight's presentation is being recorded, and we will make that recording available to you in a follow-up email on Monday. So you can expect that in your inbox. It'll live on our YouTube channel, and you can share it with friends, family, colleagues, anyone who you might think would be interested in learning alongside you with everything that will come this evening. So again, glad to have you here, and it's good to see you all.
Thanks, Leila. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce you to tonight's two presenters. Alecia Brewster is a graduate of the College of Charleston and Clemson University. She served as program director for Sustaining Way and South Carolina Interfaith Power. Her career began as an elementary teacher in Greenville County and Charleston County Title I schools, where she witnessed the direct impact of poverty on her students and families. Alecia helped to found Greenville Mentoring Collaborative, a network of service providers and other stakeholders working together so that every young person in Greenville has the supportive relationships they need to develop into thriving adults. She is the proud mom to Zora, Zachary, and Alyssa Grace, and I'm happy to say Alecia Brewster is a member of the board of directors for Just Faith Ministries. Michael Brown holds a law degree from the University of South Carolina. He's a trained beekeeper, certified in sustainable agriculture and permaculture. Michael serves on the boards of directors for the South Carolina Food Policy Council and the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association. He works daily to combat the reality of food deserts in communities across the state. As a recognized environmental justice advocate, Michael champions sustainable approaches and community resiliency through energy policy reforms, community development, implementation of efficient energy alternatives in low-income communities, affordable housing innovation, and transformative healthy lifestyle practices. Michael's passion about helping to heal the land propelled him to start in 2019 a regenerative urban farm, Roots of Life. Alecia and Michael, we're so delighted to have you. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jack. Thank you, Michael, for joining me today. Jack, you are actually, and the rest of you are coming into a conversation that Michael graciously allows me to keep him sometimes up at night with all the emails that I've sent throughout the day about this topic of the energy transition. As you read my bio, for some of you, you may think, why is this person who was a school teacher, who has worked in program management, who has, organized mentoring and organizations to be able to serve young people, why is she talking about energy? And sometimes I wonder too, how do I find myself in these conversations? Because it seems like I started my life off one way, and lo and behold, as Jack, you shared that really, really important prayer as far as I'm concerned, because I strive to really live my life listening to what God has for me to do. So what is my work to do? And I just came back from a conference in DC, and I love going to DC because I get to remember my origin story and how I came to be the person that I am and do the things that I do. So my mother, who was this fiercely independent young woman at the age of 18, after she graduated from high school, she moved from a little small city in South Carolina called Sumter, South Carolina. If any of you are in South Carolina, you probably know Sumter, South Carolina. There's not a whole lot there other than an Air Force base, but she moved to DC, Washington, DC, after she graduated in 1978, met my father, Henry, and I came to be in 1979. And I remember, as a child, early years in DC, and even after we had moved to another location out in Texas and some other places, I remember thinking to myself, you know what? I never said this to my mom, but I always thought, I am never going to be like my mom. She was mean. She made me eat vegetables before I could have dessert. She would make me go to bed at 9 o'clock. She would make me do all of these crazy things. So I thought in my immature head. And of course, fast forward today, I have 3 children, and I am really, really grateful that I've been able to carry a lot of the things that my mother, she was a young mom, but she was very intentional about making sure that she set a foundation, that I would be able to also be independent, not as fiercely independent as she is. I don't think that I would pick up and move out to New York at the age of 18 or to DC even, but I am very fortunate to have that kind of as a backdrop for who I am. My children are the reason that I do everything that I do. And so this conversation about the energy transition is about my children, just like any of the other work that I do. And I shared the story about my mother because it really does, for me, parallel this conversation that Michael and I have been having and that we've been having with others about what we're seeing happen as we transition kind of into this 2.0. So, going back, hundreds of years to the Industrial Revolution, when we, had kind of this emergence of people moving from, the agricultural, small farms into the cities and really working in industry that was fueled by fossil fuels. And for a long time, we've known that that was not sustainable and that we were going to have to begin incorporating other resources that would be more sustainable. But as we transition into this new renewable energy, clean energy transition, we are really fortunate that we have this grid that has been provided, this foundation has been provided. We have this technology that we have. We have been fortunate to have a lot of benefits, but we also know that the fossil fuels have also led to the emergency that we're in currently around climate change and the warming of our planet and all of the unfortunate impacts that we all are feeling indirectly in some way and very directly in a lot of our communities, but in particular for many BIPOC communities that are often subject to fossil fuel industry that has led to pollution and other poisons going into their communities, but also has left a lot of communities blighted. And unfortunately, while we have a lot of benefit, and going back to my own story, while there were so many wonderful things that I have because of my mother, I also know that she wants me to do better for my children. She wants me to be better. And we are in this transition to the renewable sources of energy, unfortunately repeating a lot of the sins of our past. And so this conversation that we have is really a conversation that is so passionate for me because everything that I do is for my children, for our children, for ensuring that all of our children are able to thrive and are able to be more resilient than we are today. And so thank you for giving me that opportunity to lift up my mother as really a big reason for why I'm here today. So Michael, I want to give you, again, thank you so much for being here with me. And I want to give you some time to share a little bit about you.
Thank you. I'm deeply honored. I can tell you one thing that I don't rarely say everywhere I go. In terms of what I do on a day-to-day basis, I'm the executive director of Sustaining Way. And so I've had the great pleasure of working with Alecia for, I guess, almost 2 years now. And it's just been a wonderful, wonderful experience. She truly is a person that is a reflection of how she lives her life. Her life is a testimony, and she does indeed give sermons every day. And sometimes she'll use words. If I can borrow previous words that have been attributed to so many notable scholars, she really does live out the creed that what she stands for. And I'm most appreciative of just her being a part of this grand experience. Directly in terms of what has been alluded to, I grew up in a community that clearly reflects what she was just talking about. My mother's side of the family, she comes from having brothers and sisters in the number of 12 total siblings. And of course, in the southern part of Spartanburg, South Carolina, which indeed is in the South, they had to live like many families lived. As we say, BIPOC, which is Black and Indigenous people of color, they had to literally live off the land. And so some of that was handed down, obviously, from my mother and her family to me. And my father, being the city guy that he was, in order to stay in good graces with my mom, he had to learn prior to going to Vietnam, serving 3 tours. He had to learn some of those ways that she grew up on. His side of the family having 7 siblings. And so it's just some of those older ways that clearly has been inputted back into the community and where we find ourselves. But literally growing up on the side of town that was the south side of town, the historical nature of how so many cities, so many counties, so many rural areas throughout this country historically were developed along the lines of what we would call redlining. The reality of, if you've had a chance to engage any of the works by Richard Rothstein, who also is an attorney, he has great work out known as the Color of Law. Literally details how America was set up. And unfortunately, when we use the terms of across the tracks or just down the street or across town, it literally meant the demarcation between certain neighborhoods, and in particular cut directly along the lines of black and white. And I grew up on the south side of town, predominantly an African-American community, and within the heart of Arkwright and the Forest Park community. We didn't know the reason why. As I was growing up as a child, just about every morning when I would get up, you could smell what seemed to be, to all the little kids as we joked, as we were about to catch the school bus, what smelled like rotten eggs. But we did notice that the sky at times had a interesting creamsicle kind of look to it, an orange, reddish look on the skyline that was mixed in with some hues of gray and oftentimes beige. Well, just as I was about to head off to law school, a small group of people in our community got together and began to question just the nature of so many people getting sick and passing away. You see, in the heart of the community, there also was an old chemical fertilizer plant that began to dismantle itself by literally, the amounts of smoke, the amounts of waste products that you could visibly see coming out of it became, so apparent that over time the company set about trying to quickly close that facility. And I imagine that was due to some interaction with local government, but indeed our Department of Health and Environmental Control, which clearly would have had the EPA literally on their doorsteps. With that being said, it's about 6 people that died within the span of 2 years. And the community just wanted to get together and try to find out, literally, was there something to this? And so the EPA came in and was gracious to give us a $20,000 grant that led to some soil samples and some soil testing. And of course, it also led to the expansion of what was later determined to be a grave Superfund site. Not only was the chemical fertilizer plant emanating stuff into the atmosphere, clearly there was groundwater seepage and damage. The local hospital system, which over time evolved into something much different, also was involved in the dumping of biomedical material within our community. And because it was such a known site to dump things at, in time it became just a de facto dumping site for others within the city and within the county. And so 3 sites were located as being the primary cause of over 70 different contaminants being in our soil and directly contributing to the diminution of life in the area. A lawsuit was brought against the fertilizer company. We all got these checks and you were able to see the concentric rings of just where the most intense areas of pollution stem from. And over time, I guess that was the methodology that was used in terms of determining if you fell within a certain ring, certain barrier, where that was. It was unfortunate. My father was sick during this time period. Being a veteran of the Vietnam War, certainly the conditions in the area only exacerbated what he was facing. And God rest his soul, he's passed away now 9 years this year. But Harold Mitchell, young man that grew up, as I say, just up the street and around the corner, Harold began to reach out to members of the local government, really wasn't getting a response. And he literally began to take trips to Washington, D.C., oftentimes sleeping in his car. At that point, then our U.S. Senator Fritz Hollins made a visit to Spartanburg, and in particular in the area, and he dedicated his efforts to help get a community healthcare facility there. And that $695,000 grant helped spur a lot of other activity from the initial $20,000 that became a reality from what the EPA shared. And years after that, about 10 years, Harold was in the State House, and I had the great fortune of being a county commissioner. And we combined our efforts along with city officials and others and continue to work to expand what was happening under what has become known as the nationally known Regenesis Project. And Harold, having served formerly as the executive director of the Regenesis Project and being the founder, it's grown to over $300 million worth of investment in the area. I share that story to say that you never know what can happen in the midst of these type of atrocities, but you have to have a blind faith to continue on, and you never know what God will place before you in terms of what may seem to be a challenge at the time, but you really have the chance to change the story and the trajectory of your community. And so Alecia and I, we have had similar conversations centered around what's happening in these communities of color, in these marginalized communities, in the communities that have the greatest need, but often have the least amount of resources in the 21st century in a first world country with third world standards. And so this gives us the blessing and the ability to operate in circles that still, if she and I are in the room, there may not be anyone else in the room that reflects our experience and indeed what we represent in terms of our background and the hue that we bring into the room, literally. So we like to bring some complexion to the connection, as I would say oftentimes. But with that, I just want to say that where we find ourselves now in terms of these conversations, it has indeed been a blessing that so many things are burgeoning with so many different opportunities, with still the similar challenges that these communities have faced 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Disparities in so many different ways. Inequality still exists in housing, substandard opportunities to adequately gain nutrients in a short distance without it becoming a labor of love, literally to be able to feed families in such a way in which diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, things of that nature that still have the highest, most negative indices in these communities continue to haunt us. And so being energy poor and not having the reality of really the same type of equity approaches to gaining power, literally through utility companies and now the alternatives, has not been still at the forefront of the opportunities of those who would benefit the most. And so we are tasked to go about and sharing the message as well as the opportunities of being connectors to change the reality of these communities. And so that's just a part of my story, but I wanted to share that with you. And thank you for having me here. And again, you have no better soul to be a part of your board than my good friend here.
Thank you. That's why I bring him along. I'm just kidding. But absolutely, as Michael said, we've been fortunate to be able to be at many different tables. And if it weren't for many times, the two of us, bringing up the lack of diversity in a lot of plans, then it wouldn't be addressed. And that's really what we are looking to address and hope that you can also be a part of the conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and begin sharing some slides, and then hopefully we'll have opportunity to have discussion. So racial equity in the clean energy transition. So I really feel strongly about this quote that I pulled from John Kerry, who says that clean energy is the greatest economic opportunity we've ever had. And I would say from a person of faith that it is one of the greatest opportunities that we have to do what's right. And economics is also an important piece in doing what's morally right, but I believe that it's an opportunity for us to really be able to correct and address some of the legacy inequities and injustices in our history. So the discussion topics that we want to invite you to have with us is why this conversation is important now, racial and energy equity and how that relates to social justice, the clean energy sector opportunities that we have before us, not all of them. This is not an exhaustive discussion, really just a starter. And then what does our faith look like in action? So some of the things that really kind of struck me and got me really going down this road is 2 years ago, I was a part of a webinar called Groundwater, and it's facilitated by an organization called the Racial Equity Institute out of North Carolina. And this data that I had never heard before was probably the one thing that I will never forget. If I forget everything else that I learned in that groundwater session, the data projects that Black median wealth will be 0 by 2053, the trajectory that we're on. In many Black and Brown communities, I'm sorry, actually, this is kind of a combined quote. But the part that came from this training was that US data projects that Black median wealth will be 0 by 2053. So withholding conversations around pay, wealth being one of the ways that families become stable and are able to weather the storms is through wealth. And this was just something that was really shocking to me. And then just to go on a little further about why this conversation is so important is we also know that we have a deadline that we need to meet as it relates to drawing down carbon. Every task in this drawdown that we have includes things like building out the grid, solar power, wind power, building out, switching to electric vehicles. All of those things are going to create jobs. And we have this opportunity to be able to begin addressing wealth through this wonderful opportunity called the clean energy transition in all of the jobs and finances and capital investment that come along with that. And so those are some of the reasons that this conversation is necessary.
If low-income housing stock was brought up to the efficiency level of the average U.S. home, in particular for African Americans, 42% of the excess energy burden would be eliminated. Almost half. That is amazing. But that's the reality. And we're talking about a time period in which that was a little bit over 5 years ago in which we began to have these conversations as it relates to the energy burden. Hadn't decreased. It's still there. So that's something that the present time that we're in affords us no greater time than times such as these, which we can impact that.
And so, again, back to, okay, we're at a pivotal moment right now, really at a crossroads. And we believe that this transition that we're in can not only help to address some of these legacy issues that we heard about, even in Michael's community and in many of the communities across our country where redlining really created these, these homes, many of them that were not the most energy efficient, that really are costing people a lot of their income. And we can actually do something about that in this era that we're in. And so this really leads us to this conversation around energy equity. And there are a couple of terms that I just wanted to bring up, but I want to start with, energy equity really is just being fair. This is about the fair distribution of the benefits and the burdens from energy production and consumption. And unfortunately, historically, and even currently to this day, the benefits are not equitably distributed as it relates to energy. And it's also not being distributed fairly, even in the clean energy the way that our energy is being produced, sometimes to the exploitation of certain communities and indigenous communities, but also who is making decisions about the energy that's being produced and how it's being consumed. So energy poverty is one of the terms that I wanted to just bring up. So lack of access, essentially, when you don't have access to modern energy services, modern conveniences. Energy insecurity is the inability to consistently meet your energy needs. And we do have a great number of individuals who are having to make decisions between being able to heat their homes and to be able to purchase healthy foods or be able to purchase their medications. And so that, weighing what's more important at the time is constantly being had in some of our communities. And then energy burden is the amount of household income spent on energy costs expressed as a percentage. And unfortunately, in communities in South Carolina, where we are, some South Carolinians, in particular in Black and Brown communities, are paying upwards 30% of their income just on heating and cooling their homes. And this is compared to the median energy burden, which is just 3% of income. So many times those who are least able to pay for their energy are paying the most, unfortunately. So we are talking about a justice issue when we talk about energy equity. When we talk about energy equity, we're also talking about racial equity, because many times these issues around energy were actually created because of many of the policies of the past. So I just wanted to share just a little diagram of what it would look like if we actually had an equitable energy system. So this is from the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy, and it starts with recognizing we do have to address the historical and institutional dynamics and structures that created the past and the current inequities that we also still see. Achieves a fair distribution. And we talked about, energy equity means that the benefits and the, as well as the burdens are fairly shared. It considers intergenerational impacts and doesn't create policies or programs that unjustly burden future generations. And so when we think about the economy, the fossil fuel economy, and the impact that that's having on our children and their children, it is unfairly impacting our future. And so that's not equitable. It ensures representation, power, and influence from community members and or environmental justice advocates in decision-making and implementation processes. And we, Michael and I, see this all the time, where again, many times when decisions are being made about how things are being developed, even about for example, our electrical vehicle infrastructure that many of our states are getting funding for. Many times there are no communities of color that are included in the conversations about how that is implemented. It institutionalizes accountability for achieving equitable outcomes from government, utilities, and other stakeholders. And it embeds inclusive, accessible, and authentic community engagement in the development of policies and programs. And again, just through the work that Michael and I do, and even as Michael shared, he is a retired county council member. Many times it is there are so many barriers for communities of color, for under-resourced communities to be able to participate in the systems that we have in place. And so an equitable energy system would actually look at all of these barriers that keep us from having that equity and begin to ensure that we have everybody at the table, that we make it accessible, that we institutionalize policies that are going to ensure that there is a fair distribution of the benefits and the opportunities, and that we think about our future.
43,560 square feet. Just imagine, that's 1 acre. And the question has become so many times that we hear, how many solar panels can typically go on an acre of land? Because the big push as we see now, the solar industry as a form of clean energy has transformed more than just at times what's stylish on some homes and what others will deem to be based upon the restrictive covenants and the HOA agreements to not place God awful looking solar panels on your homes. The question in terms of the affordability that's gained from the use of solar energy clearly has been debated for a number of years, but the reality is clearly when we talk about net zero opportunities for homes or reducing the cost of energy, it still is one of the greatest burdens. Again, as we say, with these marginalized communities, communities of color, and communities that historically have been outside opportunities that other communities have had the ability to participate in. And then when we talk about solar, we know that there has been a great reduction, not only in the cost of materials, but the reality that is allowed the solar industry to pick up and gain literally steam in so many different arenas. Because again, engaging the policymakers, it has become more of a understood and widespread alternative in terms of energy to be used in a number of communities. And unfortunately, and in reality, most of the time, based upon the cost, initial costs that have been involved with utilizing solar, it's typically found its usage in upper middle class and indeed highly socially and economically viable communities. But to think that such an opportunity will historically continue to go underutilized in communities that could indeed gain from the greatest benefit is why this conversation is so very pertinent, so very necessary for this message to continue. Because again, that 43,560 square feet opportunity of 1 acre, you imagine just 1 kilowatt, which essentially could power 1 square foot. If you take that 43,560 square feet, that's about 435 kilowatts. 1 kilowatt can heat or cool 100 square feet, 435 kilowatts. Imagine the typical American home, or indeed a number of these communities are being impacted. It's more than enough opportunities for just 1 acre of solar panels to be utilized for a community and still have an opportunity where we currently stand with the cost involved for profits to be made by energy providers or for that type of energy to be recirculated in communities. Because again, this type of technology is getting cheaper literally by the year, and the expansion of its use is happening all throughout the land. The reality, unfortunately, with what we face when we do talk about clean energy opportunities, it has become something that shouldn't be cost prohibitive, as there are so many opportunities for the government and indeed companies to come in and scale their prices to the economy, the local economy. But as Alecia and I know, and many of you also know, it's unfortunate communities that we were talking about, the two greatest things that have the greatest drain on discretionary income is, number one, how people feed themselves, and number two, how are they going to address their utility needs. You're talking about people putting in over 40% of their income going towards utilities. It really becomes a drain on literally their financial viability. And so a project that we're looking at that has been utilized in other areas in the world, which is beginning to gain some momentum here in South Carolina, is the use of agrivoltaics. It's the meeting of the opportunities of using solar energy through solar power, as well as agriculture. And literally not only just powering the farm, but having the ability to grow under the solar panels or in complement to the solar panels on farmland that historically, if you looked at the number of acres, as I just pointed out how much power can be generated under these panels becomes under or unused space, but it's room for opportunities. And so I'm thankful that I'm also a part of a growing major project that will begin to be utilized along with what unfortunately has been known as the corridor of shame. So I'm going to give you two guys, give you two terms for homework to look up: the Regenesis Project and, of course, the corridor of shame. But we're noticing that's becoming the corridor of opportunity along the I-95 region here in South Carolina for rural counties that historically have been in the most dismal economic situations and have not participated or had the ability to have viable economic development come their way. But very land rich, but in realities and all other indications of very poor communities and rural communities. And so through agrivoltaics, there's going to be a meeting of minds that will come together to not only provide the type of food that, again, can go back into the community to contribute to healthier lifestyles, but it also provides a different way in which people can approach, quote unquote, farming, not in the traditional sense, but also complementing some things that have been there. And of course, this will lead to what we know to be an opportunity for a new type of industry. And of course, we know this is going to be very groundbreaking. And so I would just ask you guys to stay tuned in terms of what's going to happen here in South Carolina. But it is a really exciting opportunity that we do have before us. Now, of course, the solarization programs have been utilized in a number of places. Again, when you look at countries like Sweden, Finland, Denmark, they have been on the cutting edge of using this type of expanded opportunities, again, besides placing panels on top of the roofs of homes. But the rooftops have yielded other opportunities here. So the solarization programs, we even allude to what's happening in Savannah, Georgia, which is to make it more affordable and definitely accessible. To getting outside of those zones in terms of the great barriers that have existed when you have to have the kind of financial outlay in which $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for a 2,500 square foot home to 3,500 square foot home has been the reality. And of course, communities that have smaller homes, but the same energy needs really have not been able to meet any of those upfront costs. And so that's changing. And so we're seeing a number of things like we're being reflected here in Savannah through their morning times and what's happening. And of course, this is a growing opportunity that's occurring throughout the South. Literally a place that has the greatest opportunity based upon the location of the South, heat intensive, but also, again, with the complement, as I point out, with the agrivoltaics having the greatest opportunity on almost a year-round basis to do some great production, not only in terms of solar energy, but all the other byproducts that can come from that. So with that being said, there's an opportunity because this is a growing area for diversity to occur in clean energy. And this is something that we are seeing as we continue to have these conversations along the clean energy sector, the need for diversity. It's a great, highly skilled area, but it's also an area that has some low barriers to entry because there are a number of different things that can take place in terms of the approach to getting involved in the clean energy sector. And we have seen a number of the service providers recognizing not necessarily that this is just the wave of the future in terms of being faddish, but it's a reality that's going to make this whole thing, our whole system, change in a very different way, but a very necessary way. And so we do see the realities of the need and the growing expansion of diversity in the clean energy industry.
And Michael, I just wanted to also note, because I see a friend of ours who's on the call, Carlos Jones, who may want to unmute a little bit later. But one of the things that Carlos owns a small solar business, and I met him because I was intentionally trying to understand why we were not seeing Black contractors getting opportunities for our Solarize programs in South Carolina. And so I was trying to figure out, is it just that we have a lack of, people of color working or owning and leading in this industry? And so Carlos was able to kind of help me better understand the current situation in South Carolina and really across our country. Really, there is a lack of diversity in clean energy. There's lack of representation. Black workers are underrepresented by nearly 40%. They make up 8% of the US clean energy sector compared to 13% of the larger economy. And so when this report was published, it really caught my eye because I was able to see that unfortunately, like in many other industries that have potential for addressing wealth, because these are industries that pay a lot more than the average median or the median wages in other sectors, it's an opportunity again. And unfortunately, when you look at all of the other racial demographics, Black workers are the least represented in this sector. And so again, why this conversation is necessary right now. So hopefully Carlos will chime in a little bit later, but he's also shared with me some of the frustrations that he's had with lots of experience in this industry, not being able to get opportunities. And he also has, his network of others who share the same sentiment that unfortunately, many times Black workers in the solar industry and other clean energy industries are unfortunately looked over. And so these are things that we do have to address and have to get really to the root of what are some of the systems that are continuing to lead to these poor outcomes. So we're really excited that, early last year, some of you may have heard about President Biden's commitment by signing this executive order, the Justice 40 Initiative, which is like this whole of government approach to advancing towards environmental justice and economic inclusion. And essentially what this says is that the executive branch has to develop recommendations for ensuring that 40% of the overall benefits of federal investments, and we know that there are going to be billions of dollars of investments in this clean energy transition, 40% has to flow to disadvantaged communities. Now, we know that words on papers only go so far. So it has to go to how is this actually translating when it gets to the state level and the local level. And that's where we need to be really vigilant. And why this is the time to have this conversation. So I want to also lift up another person who I recently met, Tabaris, who is another Black man in the clean energy industry who is also working to raise the awareness, heighten the awareness, but also help to ensure that we fill the gap that we have. And so he shared this infographic that just shows how we can begin to see real change and real wealth built in communities of color by preparing these community members with trade careers, by helping them to enter skilled trades, by helping them to achieve these even higher level skills, by helping with starting small businesses and beginning to get contracts. These contracts that we know, again, are imminent. They're already beginning to come into our communities by building businesses and technical skills and helping them to add employees. And then by gaining access to capital so that they are able to pursue those larger contracts that, again, help with providing the foundation for this era 2.0, energy 2.0, looking different than what we have currently.
Go ahead. I was going to say, be mindful. 8 minutes left, but go ahead. I got you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I want to just close out with just some things that we have talked about, but I'm sure this is not an exhaustive list about, what can we do? We know that there is at least an issue. For me, it's a moral imperative. As a mother, as a person of faith, I believe it's a moral imperative for me to work towards taking action in this area. And so some ways that we can do that is by being active in the policymaking at the state, local, and utility levels, by supporting BIPOC communities that are impacted by fossil fuels, but also BIPOC clean energy businesses and contractors, helping with the networking tables, building the networking tables if they're not existent in your community, as they are just beginning to come together in our communities, by teaching community members about energy equity, by writing op-eds about Justice 40 and making sure people are aware that this is a way for us to be able to address some of those legacy issues, and by, of course, going to your houses of worship and beginning to look at who are you sourcing for contracts when you decide that you need to do energy efficiency work at your house of worship, or if your congregation decides to implement solar energy, who are you using for those projects? So those are all things that we thought about, but I'm sure that there are many others. This is not an exhaustive list. So with that, I think we're going to at least transition to our conversation, and then maybe come back for questions at the end.
And what I certainly will say that based upon the fact that this is a burgeoning area, Carlos is one of the most knowledgeable persons that I've ever met that clearly can speak and articulate not only the frustrations that's involved in trying to gain access in terms of a service provider and entrepreneur in this area, but clearly in terms of what has happened along the lines of legislation, and as things that are beginning to change, the doors that literally could open and change the reality of the 8% that's currently involved in this area. So I don't know if Carlos wants to say anything in regards to that. I want to give you the opportunity, sir.
Leila, if you'd like to unmute Carlos if he's interested in speaking with us right now.
Carlos does have the ability to unmute.
Okay.
So, yep.
Oh, great. I wasn't sure. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. This has been very informative, even on my end. I will say that, like, speaking to the issues as far as the diversity within the industry, a lot of it is boiled down to not just people being given the opportunity, but being given the knowledge as well. For me personally, I know that I can go out tomorrow and in the state of South Carolina, all I need is an LLC and 3 people to say that I installed a system for them and I did a good job, and give the state $100, and I have the ability to go out and pull permits for solar projects for residential. If I partner with an electrician, then I can subcontract for other major companies, which would give me, daily amounts of work where I can hire additional crews. But that's not something that a lot of people know about. And, even as far as the electricians, there's a huge gap in the number of Black electricians in the field, at least those who can pull a certain level 2 or higher permit. Even fewer as far as commercial able contractors. So I think overall, training people and providing that education will be a huge milestone. And then, of course, reaching into the consumer side, pushing legislation to move those tax credits that are really an income barrier into changing them into rebates versus credits. Because right now, those credits only apply against your tax liability. And for lower income Americans, that means that someone who has a household income of $60,000 isn't going to be able to do the system that may be able to offset enough of their power. They just won't be able to access it because they'll lose out on the 26% of the federal tax credits because they just don't have the ability. They've got 2 kids or 3 kids. They've already got excess credits. So when they go to file for those solar tax credits, the government's going to say, hey, good news, you already got enough. You're going to lose those that federal tax credit that you would have gotten from solar. And there's actually a ton of horror stories about that particular thing with Power Home Solar recently. They've been in the news for kind of not explaining that properly to a lot of homeowners. But I think overall it comes down to education and legislation.
Carlos, thank you. What we'd like to do, as is our habit, is to give everybody on the call a chance to chat with each other for a few minutes. So let's break up into small groups for just 10 minutes. And Leela's going to post, and already has posted, some questions for you in your small group so we can talk together about Alicia's and Michael's presentation. So can I just suggest you introduce yourselves, then jump right into the questions. Pick any one that meets your fancy. As soon as I stop talking, Leela's going to send you an invitation to join a breakout room. So please, if you're on the call tonight, join one of these groups, share some of your own thoughts and wisdom about it, and we'll reconvene in 10 minutes for some question and answer time with Michael and Alecia. So Leela, go ahead and break people into groups now. Thank you. Welcome back. We're going to now ask Alecia and Michael to respond to some questions that maybe came out of your breakout rooms. And so feel free to send your questions to me, and so that I can kind of sort through them. We got several while you were talking, Alecia and Michael. And the very first one that came to me was somebody from California asking if you were familiar with CHIRP. The acronym, it's the CHERP, and I guess they were just curious if you were aware of that as an organization to be connected to.
I am not.
Okay.
Do you know what CHERP stands for? Is that an acronym?
Let's see. I'll click on the link real quickly. It says CHIRP Solar Works. I tell you what, Barb, who actually sent the question, do you want to unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about CHIRP?
Yes, CHIRP is based here in Southern California. It is a nonprofit solar. They basically employ people. They may have been incarcerated, homeless, they may be disabled, and they give them training in the solar industry. And panels that are produced at that plant will then go on the homes of low-income individuals at no cost. So they're training people to be installers too. They're expanding this model around the U.S. And they also have another auxiliary program where they can grow like hydroponic vegetables in areas where there are food deserts. So it's a really great model. And if you would like to get in touch with them, please send Jack your email and he can contact me and I'll put you in touch with those people there at CHIRP.
Hey, Barb, could I ask you to repost the link that you sent me to everybody? Just go ahead and send that note to everybody and then they'll all have that link.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Let's see. A question here about wind power. A lot of your focus, Michael and Alecia, was on solar, and there are some parts of the country where wind farms, I'm thinking of Iowa, California, not just to mention a few, where that seems to be a dominant alternative energy industry. And do your comments apply pretty much the same to those industries as well?
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, we just in South Carolina passed legislation to study wind more, look at ways that we can incorporate that business even more so in the state of South Carolina. But certainly, this wasn't exhaustive at all conversation, just really, wanting to highlight some of the projects that we're working on. And also just, to kind of extend the conversation that Barb had with us about going, being able to install solar in low-income communities. One of the projects that we're working on is to try to partner with Habitat for Humanity and to have solar and solar storage integrated into a habitat build in one of the communities that we're currently working in. So yeah, solar, wind, any renewable energy, hydro. We don't have much of that here, but definitely solar and wind are two. And one of the things too that I have a friend who I actually went to college with. I didn't realize she was working in wind until I ran into her last week. But she was talking about how, the company that she works for, they pay thousands and sometimes upwards of millions of dollars to farmers and individuals who own land for the use of their roads to be able to install wind turbines and for being able to lease the land. But Keisha's on the webinar. Excellent. Hello, Keisha. But yes, so this is interesting because she says, because she's been working in the energy industry for a long time. She said, when we were, putting in gas lines and going through communities of color for coal industries, we never paid them for the use of their land and for the impact it's had on their communities. But we are paying these farmers, and many times, unfortunately, because of again historic past, again, people of color don't benefit from that. So that's just another important notation.
What I'd like to do now is just go ahead and open up the floor for anybody who wants to unmute themselves to ask Michael or Alecia a question or bring up a comment that came from your small group conversation. So the floor is open for anybody who'd like to join in.
Two years ago or three, Portland had a referendum to fund clean energy retrofits for low-income minority homeowners and renters, and to hire minority workers to do this at living wages, and to build solar panels in our low-income communities and fund urban gardens in those communities. This was an initiative from a broad range of civic-minded folks in Portland. It's funded through a 1% tax on all the big businesses in Portland, like Target and all that kind of business that do billions in the United States. And it's raising millions to do this work, to make energy equity for people who otherwise wouldn't have a chance. And I think it could be done in most any city in the United States.
Thanks, Ed. Anybody else? Or Michael or Alecia, would you like to respond to Ed's comment?
Ed, what you speak to is the spirit of collaboration, as we've been able to see along the lines of two government departments that we're working with, one with the EPA and one with the USDA, that deals overall with environmental justice. And there is some conversation as we just came back from the State House, as Alecia has just said, with the passage of the study that's going to directly impact wind. There also is the opportunity for the proposal of a 2-cent sales tax, or penny sales tax, as we like to say, with its usage throughout South Carolina and different opportunities historically for green spaces that will incorporate some of the very things that you're talking about. It gives us the ability to go back and retrofit some of the land, in terms of community gardening, but also combine it potentially with the use of community development block grants to address the old structure of LIHEAP programs and going back and remediating homes, but expanding that with the usage of modern technology as we talk about clean energy. And there's always a push, clearly, for the growing areas of renewable energy. Our community colleges are doing a great job in terms of expanding their programs as well. And so we're trying to to have this comprehensive opportunity to bring all this together. And one project that we're working on in a particular community involves the potential of the electrification of the entire bus system, over 184 buses, and the association of the jobs that can come from that. So we're working on that. So I appreciate that, Ed.
Thank you. Anybody else? A comment, question? Okay, well, Alecia and Michael, thank you so much for being with us tonight. It was just very, very helpful, and I appreciate the effort of trying to highlight an issue that might not come to mind right away when we think about energy transitions, the enthusiasm or the passion to get things green, and realize that as we do that, we can do it like anything, badly or well. And you have given us a critical touchstone for thinking about this transition that is happening and is going to happen more in a way that makes not only for environmental justice, but for economic justice, racial justice as well. So thank you both for your wonderful presentation, and thanks for being with us tonight. And can I ask our community to give a hand clap for our speakers tonight? Thank you.
Thank you. And Jack, I just want to say thank you to you and the Just Faith team. I was introduced to Just Faith a couple of years ago, as Jack mentioned, through a program called Sacred Land. And one of the scriptures that I love that was a part of that was Psalms 104, where David is just talking about how great God is. And it ends with, well, almost the end, 30 through 34. I just wanted to share. When you send your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works. He who looks at the earth and it trembles, who touches the mountains and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord all my life. I will sing praise to my God as long as I live. May my meditation be pleasing to him as I rejoice in the Lord. And I'm just so, so grateful to be a part of a community of faith that really does reflect on its actions and thinks about how to not only sing songs and study scripture, but also to put it into action. I think that as we are going through this transition, as we are seeing God create something new, that we have the opportunity to take actions that will bring life and bring substance and resilience to all people. So thank you for bringing us together in this way, Jack.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Yes, Alecia, that's wonderful. You could guess why we love having Alecia on our board of directors.
Yes, absolutely. Wow.
So just to reiterate something that Leila told you earlier, we will be sending an email to all of you with a video link of tonight's presentation. Feel free to share it widely if you like. Also in that email will be an invitation for you to join the Just Faith Network. Just Faith Ministries has an interesting slate of membership offerings this year, so be sure to check out what's happening in the Just Faith Network and join us if you haven't already. And now I would like to talk to your wallet. You can listen as I talk to your wallet if you like, but 3/4 of the operating budget of Just Faith Ministries is provided by the generosity of folks like all of you who participate in one of our programs or events. In other words, Just Faith Ministries is essentially a gift from our past participants to our future participants. So tonight's presentation was free, but we invite you to partner with us to offer opportunities like this as a gift to the world going forward. Finally, I'd like to invite you to next month's Acting for Justice event on Thursday, June 16th, as Chuck Collins, the author, teacher, and director of the program on inequality and the common good at the Institute for Policy Studies, will address this topic: inequality in the beloved community, a faithful response to extreme wealth inequality and the racial wealth divide. So again, join us on Thursday, June 16th for Chuck Collins. And finally, I will close our time together with a short prayer. So again, thank you for joining us. Let's pray. Creator God, creative word, creating spirit, instill in us the humility of creatures and the wisdom of co-creators. May we act and speak and breathe as if within your dance of divine love. Open us to marvel at the wonder of your handiwork. Enable us to see your spirit within all things. Teach us to respect that all is created. Humble us to hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Empower us to respond with all our heart and mind and spirit. In Christ and through the Spirit, we seek to be carers within your creation, Creator God. Amen. And good night, everybody. Thanks for being with us.